Does the real element 115 have a connection with UFOs? Facts about moscovium, element 115. Nathan Chandler, Housetop Works writes, element 115 is an enigma of sorts. It was only added to the periodic table in 2016, yet for decades it has attracted extra attention because of supposed connection to extraterrestrial technology and alien life forms. Intrigued? Before we answer whether there is a connection, let's find out what element 115 really is. Element 115 is called moscovium. It's a man-made super heavy element that has 115 protons in its nucleus, emailed Jacqueline Gates, a scientist with the Heavy Elements Group in the Nuclear Science Division for Berkeley Lab in California, whom we spoke to in 2015. As with all elements in the periodic table, the element number corresponds to the number of protons in the nucleus of the element's atom. That is 23 more protons than the heaviest element that you can find in large quantities on Earth, which is uranium. Gates said that element 115 is an extremely rare element that's made one atom at a time in particle accelerators. It's made in particle accelerators. It exists for just a fraction of a second before it decays into another element, she says. She said it is special because it is near a predicted island of stability where some super heavy nuclei might have much longer lifetimes. Instead of living for less than a second, they could exist for minutes, days, or even years. That is long enough that we might be able to use them for particular applications, she said. How moscovium was created. Element 115 was discovered in 2003 in Dubna, Russia, at the Flerov Laboratory for Nuclear Reactions by a group of scientists led by nuclear physicist Yuri Oganessian. The element was eventually named moscovium because Dubna is a city in Moscow. To make this element, the scientists accelerated ions of calcium-48, 48Ca, to around 10% of the speed of light, and then bombarded americanium-243, 243 AM, with them, and through this bombardment they were able to successfully fuse the nuclei of 243 AM and 48 Ca atoms, said Gates. To create a super heavy element, you need the complete fusion of two lighter elements, she said. This process produced 4 atoms of moscovium. She said the new element that they made had 115 protons, 20 from 48 Ca and 95 from the 243 AM. And she said this new element was then separated from all the other reaction products using the Dubna gas-filled recoil separator and then implanted into a detector where scientists were able to watch element 115 decay into element 113. The internal structure of the 115 nucleus with odd numbers of protons and neutrons, Z equals 115, N equals 173, largely prevents spontaneous fission, so it is likely that the nucleus will undergo alpha decay, Oganessian wrote in Nature Chemistry in 2019. Alpha decay is a type of radioactive decay where an unstable nucleus changes to another element by emitting a particle composed of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Emission of an alpha particle forms an odd nucleus of element 113 that, for the same reasons, will also undergo alpha decay. This decay pattern is reproduced with element 111, then 109, and so on, she said. At each step of this odd stairway, we decrease an atomic number of the nucleus by 2, and we move away by 2 neutrons from the magic number, N equals 184. As a result, the nucleus becomes more stable to alpha decay, but more prone to spontaneous fission, and eventually the chain will be terminated by spontaneous fission, she said. It took years for researchers to work out some of the details about moscovium. It wasn't until 2018 that Berkeley Lab scientists figured out that the element's mass or atomic weight, the total number of protons and neutrons in an atom, was 288. To nab this vital number, they repeated the process that the first discovery used to pin down the element. In doing so, they managed to produce roughly 1 atom of moscovium per day, and that atom was captured by an instrument called Fiona for the identification of nuclide A, which to the untrained eye looks like a small metal bank vault. So far, moscovium does not have a practical use outside of scientific study. Element 115 and the alien connection. Now this is where it gets really bizarre, and it has to do with Bob Lazar, because he said it back in 1984-9, before it was even discovered. Now, before it was even made, okay? He talked about this with the back engineering of, reverse engineering of UFOs. So element 115 was only discovered, as we said, in 2003, but it may sound familiar because the name has been around for decades in connection with UFOs, aliens, and other related phenomena. And here we go. We're referring to the long-lived story of Bob Lazar, Robert Bob Scott Lazar, who in 1989 went public with what he said was top secret information about element 115. So, no matter how bizarre we think Bob Lazar's stories were, because of the fact that he talked about element 115, this yet undiscovered element being connected with UFOs, obviously we can believe what Bob Lazar has been telling us all this time. So Lazar claimed to be a former employee at Area 51, the famous and highly classified area of the Nevada training range operated by the United States Air Force, where his job was to reverse engineer crashed alien flying saucers. He said that he'd personally worked with element 115, which was used to pilot alien spacecraft. It is impossible to synthesize an element that heavy here on Earth. The substance has to come from a place where super heavy elements could have been produced naturally. This is what Lazar said. Lazar said that he'd seen evidence of anti-gravity propulsion technologies and 9 alien spacecraft stored in a hangar in Area 51. 9 UFOs stored in Area 51. 9. Those spaceships ostensibly used some sort of propulsion system that harnessed the inherent power of gravity and thus utilized the characteristics of element 115 to work their technological wizardry. The government does not confirm the employment of anyone who worked at Area 51, and as some sources have pointed out, the gist of his claims have never been thoroughly disproved. Yet, there is still the fundamental science contradicting his claims. No, there is no connection between this discovery and the claims of Bob Lazar, said Gates. Presently, all the created atoms of element 115 have decayed way too fast to be used to fuel UFOs, she said. So instead of the excitement about little green men and incredible spacecraft, we're left with real, tangible, and equally thrilling science. For the people who are immersed in these advances on a daily basis, that's more than enough. After all, moscovium is an amazing element. Gates said that it is a sign that we're pushing the boundaries of what we know about the universe. She said element 115 is special in that we can make it easier than some lighter elements like element 112 or element 113. Typically, as we add more protons, it becomes harder to make a new element. This trend is broken around element 115. And due to this, we have been able to make over 100 atoms of element 115 and begin to understand its nuclear and chemical properties, she says. Now, editor's note says, after this story was first published, we heard from Jeremy Kenyon, Lockyer Corbell, who directed the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, and is very familiar with Lazar. Corbell emailed us some additional information about Lazar and element 115 that we've excerpted here. When Lazar first came forward in 1989, he made a point to explain that there's no reason a version of element 115 could not be synthesized and observed at some point in the future. In fact, he predicted that it would be observed as did many, just likely not in a stabilized form because of the statistical improbability of landing on a irrelevant isotope. The isotope discovered in 2003 is not the isotope that would account for what Lazar has described having had access to while working at Area 51 Site 4. Lazar reports that the 115 he had access to was far more stable. Corbell said, "My understanding of Lazar's thinking is that with the advances in bombardment techniques, new isotopic combinations would be achieved. However, just like how gold has 37 different isotopes and only one isotope is stable, 115 is expected to have mostly rapid decay isotopes, so hopefully in the future we will land on a version with a longer half-life, even if it just ends up being a few atoms of it. That would be cool, and one day will likely happen," Corbell said. Now, that's interesting. Elements have been discovered roughly every 3 years until recently. Now researchers must pump more technology and money into projects that may or may not generate fleeting atoms of newfangled elements. One lab in Russia, the Flerov Laboratory of Nuclear Reactions, hunts relentlessly for new elements in hope of expanding our understanding of the universe. In the past 65 years, that lab has discovered 10 new elements. So this is Eucalyptus Bark by Nathan Chandler on How Stuff Works. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box